Hey, what's going on, everybody? Today I am doing a bit of an untraditional video. I am on a road trip from Tennessee all the way back to Minnesota in my 2022 Tesla Model Y. Now, you might be asking, why would you take your electric car? Why not take the truck? Why not take the ProMaster van? The reason I'm taking this car is I'm testing this out to see how well it will handle some long distance road trips. I would love to throw the Paramotor in the back and be able to travel 300-400 miles places and do some flying. I can camp out of this car. That's what makes this Tesla so cool, is that it's got camp mode. So I can set the temperature of the interior and leave it in camp mode, and I can sleep in here all night and have HVAC running and heating or cooling the car as needed. Put the back seats down and it's enough room for a full-size mattress. It's very comfortable. So that is one advantage of traveling in this particular car. The other advantage is it's got autopilot. So I set the car, it takes off, it does its thing, and that just makes much more relaxing driving versus taking the truck or the van, which are a little bit noisy, a little bit more cumbersome. So if you're interested in something like this, stay with me on this adventure, and we'll see how well this Tesla holds up to some potential Paramotor adventures down the road. I'm sure most of you know Teslas are simplistic in the fact that all the vehicle information is done through this main tablet-like screen. Everything is displayed here: your speed, your cameras, your vehicle diagnostics, and of course how the energy is used during your drive. One of the focuses on this trip is to not only see how much energy I use, but how accurate that information Tesla provides is when it comes to distance travel and energy needs. Now, when you drive your gas-powered vehicle, we think of fuel economy in regards to how much gas is needed to move the car. However, efficiencies are lost in the use of air conditioning, exterior temperatures, tire pressure, speed, adverse weather, and of course how aggressive you are with the gas pedal. We don't always think about that, which is why many people get far less miles per gallon than their vehicle is actually rated for. And we aren't given a real breakdown on how much gas is used individually for those parts of our drive. However, Tesla is much different. We are provided a real breakdown, and this information is very helpful when it comes to travel, as we can see how the way we drive or the environment we're driving in affects our efficiencies. On this short drive so far, I've used 19.3% more than Tesla thought I would. This is based mostly on driving, and due to the fact that 60% of this drive has been uphill going up the mountain working my way to Nashville. While Tesla does account for elevation, other variables will impact this estimate. For example, payload weight, my speed, how fast I'm going up those hills, the colder weather of course, and then windier conditions. The other 6.4% increase you can see is due to battery conditioning. Because it's only 35 degrees out, the car preheats that battery area in preparation for fast charging. The main thing I'm looking for during this trip is accuracy. When navigating to my destination and upcoming Superchargers, is Tesla's estimate accurate, and what do I need to do on my end to keep pace with their estimate? So far the drive's been going pretty good. I'm currently at about 260 miles into the trip. I'm averaging about 328 watts per mile. Now, when I locally drive around my area, this is off the highway, I'm usually around 250. So it is a little bit higher, but not as high as I would have thought going 70 miles an hour consistently. I've added in about 200 to 300 pounds of weight with just all my gear. I brought a refrigerator, some extra food, just some safety equipment, things like that. I've got my second stop coming up here in the next 20 minutes, and I'll be at about 25% battery at that point. So we'll see how long it takes to charge, see how much it's going to cost at that point. But so far, I have to say, the trip has been really nice. The use of autopilot is phenomenal, like way better than I thought. I played around with it a little bit at home, you know, in just back roads and some off-highway roads, things like that. What this system is designed for is the highway or the interstate system. I actually went through the entire stretch of Nashville, Tennessee, multiple lane changes, exiting to or transitioning to different interstates, and autopilot took care of it all. Very impressive. But the cool thing about the full self-driving is if I want to make a lane change, I just turn my signal on. The system will check to make sure it's safe, and then it will do the lane change when it's safe. So it will lane change on its own, but you know, as a active driver, I look ahead and I can see, okay, there is a police officer with a car pulled over like a half mile ahead. So I will anticipate this ahead of time and change lanes versus having to wait for the system to do it. So I really like that they blend the two together a little bit, where you still have the control you want, but the car is going to kind of be there as a backup and take over as needed. Okay guys, a little bit of an update. I've got about 2 hours left of this drive. I just did my very last charge in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Now for some reason, that supercharger, I added about 60 kilowatts of energy and it only charged me $7.50. Typically I'd be paying somewhere in that $20 to $25 range, so I'm not really sure why it was that much less, but I'm not complaining. A couple things I've noticed on this drive. Definitely takes a little bit longer. Yesterday was my longer day, typically a 10 to 10 and a half hour drive day, and it took me about 11 and a half to 12 hours of driving. Now, that's for two reasons. One, of course, is we do spend a little bit more time charging. When I do make a stop, you're looking at 20 to 30 minutes of charge time. Now, what's kind of cool about the Tesla is the engineering behind the travel software. So when you have a destination in place, Tesla does a really good job of telling you where you need to stop and of course how much energy you need to make it to that destination. So in my mind, when I have a gas vehicle, is every time I stop I fill the tank all the way up. I want the maximum amount of fuel so I can get the furthest distance. It's a little bit different with a Tesla. It will sometimes max you out at only 60% and say, hey, you've got plenty to get to your next charging station, so you might as well not wait here any longer. So it's kind of cool that way, but it's been an adjustment because in my mind I want to charge to 100%, so I know I've got plenty of power. Who knows what could happen between one stop to the next where I might need to take a detour or I get stuck in traffic, or who knows. So I typically adjust to about 20 to 30% extra so that if there's some variable in there I can still make it without a problem. But I have to say I haven't had any issue. It's been very reliable, and the percentage it says I will have when I get to the next charging station has been almost spot on. If anything, it errs on the side of caution, and I will have a few percentage points higher than what it predicted. So after doing that a couple times, you really start to trust the system, and then it just becomes like a normal car. I'm stopping for gas. As much as people talk about range anxiety, I think it's there in the beginning stages, and then you start learning the software of the car, and Tesla does such an amazing job of helping you overcome that anxiety because you can now trust the system. Now, one of the other reasons it took me longer for this particular drive is efficiency. So in my regular vehicle, I might go 5 over the speed limit. I can get a little bit further. When you're traveling that distance, 5 over the speed limit actually does save you some time. But in this car, I'm typically going the speed limit, if not a little bit slower, so that my range is maximized. It's also more comfortable to drive, and with autopilot, it's doing most of the work for me. So I don't feel the need to rush. I don't have any stress of, well, I need to pass this group of cars, or here comes a big truck, I need to work around this situation. The car is taking on a lot of that responsibility. And as much as I was against that idea when it first came out, especially being an educator for driving, I thought, oh, we don't need cars driving themselves. But there is definitely something far more relaxing to having it take on some of that. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the fit and finish of the car. I've always thought Teslas were a decent looking car. They're not extraordinary, they're somewhat plain in a lot of ways, but it's kind of one of those cars where when you know what it's about, it looks better. But if you compare it to other models out there, different vehicles and manufacturers, it's not the best looking of cars. Now, when I first got this car, I'd never driven a Tesla before, so buying the car was basically brand new to me. So I got in the driver's seat, and I remember being a little unimpressed. The interior is very plain, and it's not just that it's lacking gauges and cool controls and all that kind of stuff. It's just even the materials that are used on the inside aren't anything special. Now, if you were paying 40 grand for it, then it would be like, hey, yeah, no big deal. But when you're spending that kind of money, there's like this expectation going in, like this is going to be a true luxury car as well. Now, after having the vehicle for some time, I started to realize what you're paying for isn't the amazing looks on the outside. It's not the super impressive interior. It's the technology that the car provides. The electric drivetrain, the traction control system, the efficiency, the tablet that has all of this data on it, and it really tracks your driving very well. The car is extremely quick. It's an all-wheel drive car. It's got the dual motors, so it handles super well. You can program in how you want the steering to be. Do you want it to be comfortable? Do you want it to be sport? Do you want the accelerator to be in a chill mode or a standard mode? There's just a lot of different adjustments you can make. Now, something little I didn't realize it had, but when it's calculating your range, I just got a notification on this trip because we've got a lot of wind whipping through Iowa right now. Well, it's a tailwind, which is great for me. So the computer figures all this out, and for this particular trip, so far, this 11.5 mile per hour wind, so it must know this based off of, all of the ways that it registers and reads information. This 11.5 mile wind from the south is saving me 2% on this trip. So for somebody who's kind of a geek when it comes to technology, that is cool to me. Like, that is just really neat to see. Now, I do have to give props to the storage, the amount of storage in this car. The side pockets have a lot of storage. The center console has a lot of storage. You've got the frunk, you've got a trunk, a huge hatch area, and then underneath the platform, you've got two big bins of storage there as well. I keep all my camping gear and safety gear in this car all the time because there's so much storage. I don't know what you would use it for if you didn't have that. Now, there are two things missing from this car that I think would make it 10 times better. One is having AC options. This has a huge battery in it. I mean, there is so much energy when this battery is fully charged, even 50% charged. You could literally run your house on this vehicle for about 4 or 5 days. That's how much energy is in this battery. But you have no way to tap into that outside of just driving the car. So why it doesn't have any 120 volts, I'm not sure. It would be nice, especially in camp mode, where I could run a griddle, I could run my hot pot, I could run my refrigerator, little things like that, that in comparison to how much energy the battery has, those would use such a little amount of energy. Now, I do have to appreciate the camp mode option. I used that last night, and I set the temperature at 60 degrees, and it was great. I mean, the car basically kept the interior nice and comfortable the entire night. Yeah, I went to bed at about 98%. I got up at 90%. So actually 8% of the battery was used to keep me comfortable all night. That's a pretty cool feature. Now, I'll be honest, I was on the list for the Ford F-150 Lightning. And the fact that even though I was pretty early on the list, there was such a high demand for that vehicle, there was no way I was going to get one in 2022. And it would have been probably late 2023 before I would have made it. So one of the things I loved about that vehicle is the fact that I can use that energy however I want. So it gives me a lot of freedom to plug my house into that. If I had a power outage, I could plug a bunch of appliances into it. Ford did a great job having that as an option for the consumer because it's your car. You should be able to use your car however you want to use it. If you've got a 77 kilowatt battery, you should be able to tap into that and use that in other areas. So I feel like the capacity of this car I underutilize because most of my driving is very local. I might put on 10 miles in a day, maybe some days 30 miles. I mean, some days the car just sits and it doesn't get used at all. So it would be nice to be able to utilize that battery in different ways. So outside of those couple things that I wish were different, and who knows, that could change down the road, but the car is pretty impressive. I'm very, very happy with it. Okay guys, well I'm back home and I wanted to give you a final conclusion on this trip as well as my thoughts on EVs. The trip to Minnesota and back went great. Honestly, I've done this trip probably 40 times in the last 10 years for work, and this was the most relaxing of all of them. Even the bit of snow driving I had on the way back, about 4 inches fell overnight, went great. The car handles amazingly well in the snow. I put 2,065 miles on this trip, using a total of 682 kilowatts of energy. I averaged 320 watts per mile. What does that exactly mean? To give you an idea how much energy this is, the average home in the US uses about 30 kilowatt hours of energy per day. This car used 22 days worth of home energy, or about this many homes for 2 days. Now I know what some of you might be thinking, wow, that is a lot of energy. How can that be efficient? Well, let's compare that to gas. So let's say I took my Ford F-150 on this trip, which I've done many times. How much gas would I use? Well, simple math, 2,065 miles divided by 16 miles per gallon equals 129 gallons of gas. Now, I like to use gallons of milk as a visual reference, as we all know what that looks like. So this is approximately 129 gallons of fuel. That's a lot of gas, right? So what does this tell us? Neither vehicle is great when it comes to cost per mile. But what about emissions? Now the Tesla is using electricity that's already been produced, meaning it's likely not creating more emissions. I don't have the time to invest too much into this, but electrical companies make a surplus of energy to meet spikes in demand. So even if I didn't plug in, there's a good chance that energy just would have went to waste if I didn't need it or I didn't use it. Now this isn't always the case, but often the case. Whereas my truck is burning all 129 gallons of gas, which creates carbon monoxide for all of those 2,065 miles. So with that in mind, the Tesla is far better for the environment when we're talking about just driving the vehicle. While I support that EVs are great if you have solar at home and or you charge from your home, superchargers are very expensive and they make your extremely efficient Tesla go from over 100 miles per gallon equivalent by charging at home to a mere 25 mile per gallon equivalent using the expensive supercharger. So in a lot of ways, I feel like the Tesla is very comparable to my SP140 electric paramotor. That thing is great. I love the fact that it's fully charged. I just throw it on my back. I don't have to warm it up. I don't have to get gas and oil. I don't have to check the spark plug. There's no maintenance really to it. I go for a flight. I come back, I plug it back in, and it's ready for me next time. Could I get by with just that as a paramotor? Personally, no. Because there are times I want to do longer flights. There's times I want to do things that only the gas motor can do at this point. And it's very much the same for an electric vehicle. Now, for the type of lifestyle that I live, where I like to travel and camp, and I'm going to tow things, whether it's a trailer or my camper, my trike, whatever the case is, I could get by with the Tesla. I could make it work. It would be inconvenient in a lot of different ways. But for the type of lifestyle that I live, I need a gas version as well. What that gas version gives me is the ability to go longer distances. I can stop wherever I need to stop to refuel. So in a comparison between cars and paramotors, it's very similar, the pros and the cons of having both. Now, what would have to change in order to make an electric vehicle perfect for all scenarios? Well, for one thing, the infrastructure for charging would have to change. Basically, everywhere there's a gas station, we would need some type of an infrastructure for charging an electric car. The fact that on a trip like this, I have set points where I have to make it, a couple hundred miles to get to the next charging point, that's kind of an inconvenience. It means that sometimes I might have to go out of my way to get somewhere just so I can charge up. The speed would also have to change, and we're getting there. I mean, it's pretty impressive how much energy I can put into this car in a short amount of time. So I feel like we're still a ways out from an electric vehicle basically serving the needs of all needs. We can just use the electric vehicle. Towing is another area where we're going to see some drawbacks. When I've towed with this Tesla, even a lighter load, I'm seeing a significant reduction in power. I'm looking at maybe even a third in a lot of cases, at least half, maybe even a third. So that's a pretty significant difference. So just like the SP140 electric paramotor compared to a gas version, we're still a ways off before it can compete at the same level. And it's the same thing with these cars. Now granted, each person's personal situation is different, and for some people an electric car can meet all of their needs. For me, not quite there yet.